Hello friends, welcome once again to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, in this session today we are going to discuss on a very important topic. The topic is related to democracy. You all know what democracy means: by the people, for the people, of the people. So dear friends, relating to democracy, today we are going to discuss on democracy and women's participation in South Asia. Yes, my dear friends, this session is all about the women's studies, and so we are going to discuss how today women is participating, and we would be covering all the South Asian countries, or we would say that we would be discussing in context to the South Asia. Under this very topic, of course, we are going to discuss more on democracy, as well as we are going to discuss on the recent developments took place in South Asia, in the South Asian region, as well as we would be discussing on under various circumstances what is the women's participation, as well as the role of political parties and NGOs. And for this we have again with us in our studios Dr. Sushila Kaushik. Dr. Kaushik is a retired professor from Department of Political Science, Delhi University. Dr. Kaushik has more than 40 years of teaching experience. So dear friends, let's take advantages from her experience and try to understand how women is participating specifically in the democratic countries, as well as if we would say in the South Asian countries. So first of all, I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Sushila Kaushik. Dr. Kaushik, welcome once again to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Though we have been discussing a lot about the women in our women studies lectures, but today specifically we are going to discuss because with the modern trends, with the changing times, the participation of the women is also increasing, or we would say it is also changing. So what you want to say on this particular issue?
Yeah, Gitika, I'll start with where you left. Today we are talking about not merely India, but we are talking about the entire South Asia, if not all the countries in equal measure, at least in some countries specifically. And we will also talking about women in participation in democracy, because as you say very correctly, it's very necessary that women participate in politics, women participate in democracy, and democracy participates in women's development, because we believe that ultimately it is the empowerment of women which will bring about the overall empowerment and power of the women as such, and their development in not merely politics but in all aspects of life as such. Because politics and participation democracy definitely gives a certain amount of power, the power to decision making, the power to sit at the top level of any decision, any board, any meeting, any party, or even the government. And that makes women very visible. That makes women actually active in making the various policies. That helps women to mold the policies in such a way that they benefit women and benefit the society at large. So participation in politics is extremely necessary for women. And the government of the day, the nations of South Asia equally are interested and should be involved with the enjoyment of these democratic rights by the women, and also help them to develop themselves as well as the others in the society. That's why we often talk about democracy and women's participation. Most of us talk about political participation of women as such, and political empowerment of women as such. That's what we will start with this today. And we also know of late that there is a lot of emphasis on the human rights issue. Ever since 1993, when we had the Vienna Conference, or even earlier when we had the Beijing Conference in 1885, we had a lot of emphasis on the women's participation at the decision-making level. The Beijing Conference, in fact, devotes one big chapter only for women in decision-making as such. And decision-making is a political act, and it's a political participation. So we reflect our own rights by participating in this. So human rights also believe that women should have the participation as such. And so almost all the constitutions in this region, as well as politics in this region, as well as the political processes in this region, talk about involving more and more women into the political functioning of the nations as such. This has been very well realized not merely by India, which made its constitution as early as 1947 to 50 and enacted it in the form of a constitution in 1950, and talked about women's political participation and rights at that particular time, but also the various other countries in the region. Particularly today, the SAARC countries include 7 nations in this, we call the SAARC body, and that includes India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, and Bhutan. In addition, we also have 2 other countries, Myanmar and Afghanistan, which attend all these various SAARC countries meetings as observer, with an observer status. So often some people even count them in SAARC countries or South Asia. We are interested particularly in these countries because they also have begun moving towards giving women a certain role, a certain space in their politics. So let us see wherever we can involve these various countries in our discussion, we will try to do this. But as such we find, as of late, the democratic trends in these countries are also changing. See, we cannot understand women's participation in democracy or their political empowerment unless we also know what is happening on the broader front of the political process of these various countries. How far is there any democracy, or what is the extent of it? We also have to see in this context what are the recent changes which have taken place in some of these countries. While India has stood stable with the 1950 constitution, and we have been going through various types of elections periodically, both at the center as well as in various states, because India is one federal country here. There are many countries in this region which are not going through this process so steadily, so consistently. We have witnessed military rule, we have witnessed in this region dictatorial rule, we have witnessed in this region a lot of violence and political upheavals, and even a lot of terrorist attacks, which makes the region sometimes very vulnerable to violence and some sort of marring of the electoral and the democratic process. If the democratic process itself gets vitiated or gets into some sort of uncertainty, then we do not expect the women or for that matter men participating in it very actively. So that is why one should know what are the recent developments which have taken place in these areas. Fortunately, happily, we find that in the past few years, lots of countries are having had their elections, and they have had more or less a very smooth elections, and they have been able to even throw out some of the important whom they thought as a dictatorial authoritarian rulers, and brought back rulers who would be more amenable to the democratic political processes and perhaps gender conscious polity as such. So, we are taking from Afghanistan is one of those which went through a very recently democratic election, has brought about a new government, and the new government headed by Mr. Ghani has talked in terms of more scope for gender and more open democratic process. We have had Sri Lanka. Again, we have had a very violent past in Sri Lanka with all the various LTTE and other types of regional crisis and regional skirmishes, but lately we have had a smooth election. Sri Lanka has been reunited politically, and this has been a very good development for us in India, particularly whose a lot of population had migrated to Sri Lanka long back. We have had Maldives with a lot of little challenges going up and down. We finally have an election which has taken place in Maldives, and a new president has come into Maldives, though there are a lot of challenges they had to go through, violence, political violence they had to go through. We have had Pakistan. Though in the earlier years Pakistan had a lot of military rule, authoritarian rule and all that, in the past 3 elections Pakistan has had clear civic rule which has come about after a smooth transition to democracy and elections. We have recently an instance where Musharraf, General Musharraf's rule, even though he was a president and not a military rule, has been replaced by a civic ruler like Nawab Sharif, and political parties have gone through a smooth election in Pakistan. We even have in Myanmar, which is not part of South Asia as such, we have had a greater recognition to the opposition parties. We have the famous leader, Sue, who has been released from her house arrest and jail, and whose party contested the elections and won a lot of seats in the Myanmar National Parliament. And so there's again a very happy augury, happy development for democracy in Myanmar too. There's more of freedom of speech and expression in that country. So in general, democracy has become more stable and very positive in these countries. In Nepal is the only country where we still have a little bit of challenges thrown in for not democracy but for a constitutional framing. Namely, in 2006 there was a sort of a coup and a palace coup in fact, and a monarchy was thrown out, and after that we have had a popular revolution, because of which Nepal went through from monarchy to a popular democracy, and they tried to formulate a new type of a constitution, because the old constitution was very much based on a monarchical rule. There was an election to constitute a constituent assembly, which constituent assembly in turn will frame a constitution. So in 2008 they had an election for a constituent assembly, which had 5 years given to it up to 2013 to frame a constitution. But unfortunately, because of internal differences among the various political parties and ideological differences, Nepal could not formulate a constitution within the stipulated period of 5 years. The result is Nepal went through another election for another constituent assembly in 2013-14, and now Nepal has a second constituent assembly which is trying to formulate a constitution for itself. We do hope when the constitution comes up, new constitution will reflect some of the very progressive, forward-looking measures they had for women in the past in Nepal as such. We will talk about these features a little more, and then finally comes Bhutan. This is a very big achievement, Bhutan, to move to democratic politics. Bhutan always has been a monarchy, but with a lot of democratic inputs in it, and in 2008 it went through an election, mainly because the existing monarch, a young man, was keen about bringing in the parties, politics and a modern democratic pattern to Bhutan. So he abdicated his position and then went for an election. This election took place in March 2008 and 24th March in fact. As a result, it was becoming from a guided democracy, it became a popular democracy after 101 years of monarchy. The monarch is still there, but not as a part of the constitution. He is guiding, he is really using his good offices. Bhutan is also somewhat little different from other countries, because Bhutan does not believe in any type of ideology, but has adopted an ideology which calls itself as greatest happiness. It believes in greatest happiness, as you have the old saying of the greatest people. So the greatest happiness is the real official ideology in Bhutan, and after adopting democracy, it has had two houses of parliament. One is called the National House, which is the upper house. The other is called National Council, which is the lower house, for both of which elections have been done on recently, and typical local names have been given to both these houses. And the upper house consists of 15 members, and the lower house consists of about 47 members. I am giving this information because it is recent and we may not even have these figures anywhere in our textbooks and all that. And there are only two major parties in Bhutan, and the very, very nice thing about it, or perhaps peculiar thing about it, is in the parliament, people don't sit as ruling party and opposition party. People don't sit as party labels. Party members don't sit together, but party members sit anywhere and in the parliament. So to some extent, some of the modern ills of a party system is being squarely faced by the Bhutanese experiment. So they don't want to divide the people, the elected members on party-wise basis, but have a united parliament which will be doing good to promote what they call the greatest happiness of the population. This is of course too recent. It has come into being only 2008 after the elections. So one would try to see how exactly Bhutan is moving, but right now it stands as a peculiar example of a different type of democracy in South Asia as such. Now we might want to see how exactly the women are participating in this. South Asia is a region which has been very strong in its history, very strong in religious philosophies. It is very strong at the same time as in conservatism, because since it has had a long history, and since it is it's a continuing, very often people call South Asia as a continuing civilization as such, the legacies are extremely strong. So it's bound to have also a certain amount of historical conservatism. At the same time, South Asia also has a common element, namely they more or less in the entire South Asia, but with exceptions like Nepal and Bhutan, it has been ruled by one colonial power, namely the British Empire. Though by 1930, gradually, maybe for administrative or also for political reasons of nationalism, this British Empire has been sliced into 4 or 5 countries, namely Myanmar, Burma was created out of this, Sri Lanka was created out of this, and we all know after 1947 when the partition took place, Pakistan was created out of there. So in the place of one big Indian empire, now we have now 4 countries, because even Afghanistan was part of the British Empire at one particular point of time. But since they had a common element till that particular time, you find a lot of common historical legacy in this country. One legacy is nationalism. The national movement has been very strong in colonial India till almost 1947 or earlier. With the result, you have Bangladesh, Pakistan, India sharing this common national movement till 1947 when they were all created. And Bangladesh was again created out of slicing of Pakistan in 1971 when there was once again a freedom movement in Bangladesh. But till that time, as it was a part of Pakistan, Pakistan was part of Greater India, so you have the same legacy continuing. And this nationalism, that same national movement, again is important for women, for the simple reason the women participated in this national movement. Lots of slogans came out during the national movement. The ideology of women's participation, democracy, their rights, their liberation, their development, all these things got formulated during this national movement. So just as India, when it became independent and had a lot of role for women in the new India, so too in the case of Pakistan, similar historical winds were blowing. So they also began adopting a lot of political measures subsequently for women in their country. When Bangladesh got separated and was created as a new country, once again Bangladesh also shared in these things. The winds of change seem to have gone around all over. You find Nepal talking about doing things in its constitution and in its politics which were very friendly to women, and even in some ways acting as a model for the rest of South Asia. You have now Afghanistan talking about giving a much more liberal space to women in Afghanistan as such, though the historical legacy there is a little more religious than in other places. So it's nice and interesting to see how these 7 nations are really moving around in the field of women's participation. We find in general the per capita income as well as development of of Sri Lanka has been much higher than that of the rest of South Asia. Either its literacy rate, employment rate or health rate, or in many of these various types of indicators which we have for development, Nepal, Sri Lanka always had much higher rate than the rest of South Asia. Possibly because of that, the Sri Lankan people did not feel the need for particularly focusing for women or their participation or their development. So we find them more or less moving on more on an equality basis rather than in any form of special measures for women in Sri Lanka, not until recently, though recently perhaps some movements is taking place there too. So somewhat the participation of women have been less in Sri Lanka as against the other, in general, I mean common sense. But then when you think in terms of the context, we do have social conservatism along with historical nationalism and some amount of cultural impact in the entire South Asia. So you have a contradictory sort of impact in all these places. One hand very forward, on the other hand quite backward, and feudalism still prevailing in any parts. Of course, patriarchy is an extremely strong factor, and a feudal patriarchy extremely strong factor in most of these countries in the region as such, though it takes a little different shape in various parts of the South Asia. Still, patriarchy, feudalism, historical conservatism, and social orthodoxy, religion and culture take a very strong place in most of these things. Nepal until recently was the only Hindu state in the entire world calling itself as a Hindu state. So the monarchy was a Hindu ruler in Nepal until recently. Of course, Pakistan and Bangladesh call themselves Islamic republics. So again, religion is a strong factor there too. In other parts of South Asia too, religion plays an important role. Sri Lanka, religion plays an important role. So these factors in a way hinder the participation of women in politics more openly, more equally with men in these regions. In spite of it, we also see the contradictory trend. If you take in terms of the leadership roles, it's very amazing. Earlier, now of course all over the world we have more women presidents emerging in Latin America, and some even contesting, wanting to contest in the United States. You have Margaret Thatcher in Britain as Prime Minister, you have in Germany a woman Prime Minister and all this. But in the case of India, in the case of South Asia, we have had women political leaders even earlier. Not merely during the freedom movement, but even subsequently once the constitution and the democratic politics with the elected leaders coming up, political parties coming up. We have had South Asia has had the unique honor, almost every country in South Asia like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, having had prime minister, women prime ministers, which is not true in any other part of the world as early as that. So we have our Indira Gandhi. Sri Lanka had its Trimau Bandaranaike and then Chandrika Kumaratunge. Bangladesh even today has two parties, major parties, and both of them are led by women leaders, and both of them have been the prime minister sometime or other. Pakistan has had Benazir Bhutto as its prime minister. So we can be very proud that South Asia has, now that a monarchy has been abolished in Nepal, maybe sometime in the future we will even have a woman prime minister in Nepal too. So this area has been quite lucky in having women prime ministers, so showing thereby historical conservatism and social orthodoxy need not prevent the women to come up in case your democracy, your constitution, your electoral process and your political parties function effectively in these countries. So this is where one takes up South Asia as a sample rather than any other part of the world as such. So elections in these countries have become a common democratic tool, and more countries are moving to periodical, regular, peaceful transition through elections in all these various countries. With the result, one can hope for more of participation by the weaker sections of the community as such in these countries. We also find because of this democratic process, and there is a keenness that women and the weaker sections should come up more and more actively participating in this democracy and election process. Very many of these countries have also adopted some special measures to enable the weaker sections to come up. India started with that in 1950 when we gave, our constitution gave the weaker sections like the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes a certain quota in our parliament and state assemblies by reserving the seats for them. So assured positions have been given to in our parliamentary processes for the what we thought at that time weaker sections. Though we have not been able to succeed in the past for many years to provide for a similar quota or affirmative action to the women in our country in the parliament, we passed a bill finally after a very long time. We passed a bill in Rajya Sabha for 33% reservation for women in the parliament and state assemblies about 3 years back, but that has not been yet passed because it's stuck at Lok Sabha. After Rajya Sabha, it has to come to Lok Sabha for being passed, but the Lok Sabha has not been able to take up this bill at all for whatever reasons. So it is alive but stuck at Rajya Sabha level. So any Lok Sabha present or the future can take it up and pass it. So the hopes are still alive. In the case of Pakistan, learning from others' experience, Pakistan and Bangladesh adopted the procedure of nominating women to the national parliament. Pakistan has 35 members and Bangladesh had 30 members, women members nominated by the ruling parties to the parliament. While Pakistan is still continuing with this experiment, in Bangladesh, unfortunately, with the changes in the government at the top, this has been given up. So for the past so many years, we do not have this nomination of 30 members in the Parliament of Bangladesh. Of course, Sri Lanka does not have any affirmative action, does not have any quota, it doesn't seem to be believing in this. It believes since women are as enabled as men by way of human development indicators and gender development indicators, they can come up on their own to contest elections and come up. In the case of Nepal, this need has been felt very much so. So Nepal has all along adopted various types of reservation for women. It has adopted a reservation which nobody else has done it by way of the number of candidates who are being put up in the elections. Compulsorily, every Nepalese political party would have to have 5% seats allocated to women. This was in the past. 5% seats allocated to women, so that at least 5% of some amount of women will come up in the parliament. But unfortunately, this is not the same as reservation or quota, mainly because even if all parties put up 5% in the seats, in the candidates, it doesn't assure that ultimately all of them will win or most of them will win. With the result, we do not have 5% women in the Nepalese parliaments before. It fell short of 5%. So when the Nepalese constitution is being reformulated and the Constituent Assembly is being reformed, we found the Constituent Assembly's election gave quite a bit of reservation for women, so that ultimately at least 35% members in the Constituent Assembly will be women. So that in the future when they make the constitution, the reflection of women's needs, women's views, women's perspectives and their own place in the future constitutions will be assured. So they adopted different methods. The Constituent Assembly in Nepal is formulated before and even now. by a combination of various methodologies of election, direct election, indirect election and nominated. All the three processes are being adopted in Nepal to formulate the Constituent Assembly. So, we have specific number of women reserved in the direct election as well as in the indirect election as well as nomination. So, finally leading to at least 35% of women coming out in the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly, which was formulated in up to 2013, definitely had 35% population of women. Now, when they again have elected another number 2 Constituent Assembly, they again have women's participation in the same. So, one hopes with that sort of a reservation adopted in the Constituent Assembly, it will also lead to some sort of a reservation or quota in the new constitution whenever it's coming up in Nepal. It's being stuck because of certain other issues, political issues like federal issues, federal representation and other things, but which will be overcome soon. So, we do hope women will get proper share and space in the new constitution and so in the new parliaments which Nepal will be electing after this comes up. This is only one aspect of democracy. Elections definitely are important. Participation in parliament is definitely important because that gives the women the power to make the decision. That gives the decision making political role for entire country as well as for the women also in the various spheres of their country as such, not merely in social and development, but also political development, but also war, also policies, economic policies, anything else we think of, then women also will be participating in policy making, policy implementation, policy monitoring, if they are policy auditing, if they are sitting there in the parliament and assemblies. But then there are other aspects of democracy. In order to move into parliament, women have to first participate in the elections. And in order to move in the elections, they have to participate as candidates. So, we have to equally give importance to the women's participation and in the election process as such, both as voters as well as candidates. Whether over a period of time, the women have been put up as in the elections as candidates, whether the women have participated as voters in the various constituencies is something which we need to look into. We have found over a period of time this moves up and down. It is not that always the women are coming in large numbers, but sometimes some elections have had a lot of women participating. For instance, in India, when in 1984 December, after Indira Gandhi's assassination, when we had the new elections in 1984 December, when Rajiv Gandhi was chosen as the leader of the Congress party and the party won thumping majority in the parliament, we had enormous amount of women who went and voted in the elections. Whatever may be the reasons, maybe the sympathetic vote, it may be the loss of Indira Gandhi, whatever. It is, women voted plenty in the parliament. Whenever there is a big issue, before the elections, women did go forward and voted plenty. Women voted a lot also in the subsequent elections in this country. Over a period, we are seeing that women are voting more and more in number in India, but the margin is increasing and the gap between the men and women are reducing. In the recent elections which we had in May 2014, we have about 65% women who have voted in the elections, when the total percentage of people who voted in the elections is 66 point some percentage, which clearly shows not merely more women came forward to vote, but also the gap between the men and the women voting is, even though it is still less than the men voting, it is, the gap has narrowed it considerably. In Pakistan, the same thing happened. In PPP elections, when PPP won, when Benazir Bhutto became the Prime Minister, that was also an election which witnessed enormous number of women voting in the elections. The elections which came up subsequently, where Benazir Bhutto's husband became the prime minister. Even that election witnessed a lot of women voting in the elections. Of course, Bangladesh has always competition between two women leaders, two women parties led by women leaders. So there is a good number of voting percentage in Bangladesh. So we find that in many of these countries, in Sri Lanka has also, because of this gender equality index being more in the past, not so much in the present, it has declined quite a bit now. We have more women coming and voting in the elections. So women voting in the elections and the percentage is one aspect of electoral politics and democratic politics, and is one of the bright aspect where women are exercising themselves, their rights as a citizens of this country. The other aspect is candidates. How many women are standing in the as candidates in the various elections? As we saw in Nepal, since it's compulsory that 5% seats are given to women, the number of candidates in Nepal definitely is much larger. Every party has to give 5%. So depending on the number of parties, there were at least 3 major parties in Nepal before, and so they gave a good number of women as seats and candidates. In India, over here, in Sri Lanka, the figure is not much. Maybe politics of violence was quite strong there for a long time. But in India, the number of women who stand as candidates has not been that good, even though there has been a tremendous movement in India, starting even almost from the time we became independent and even before, for women's participation in politics and the reservation movement. We still, this impact of the reservation movement has not been felt on the number of women participating. So with the result, our figures have always remained a single digit of candidates in the elections, and at the most it has come up to 10, and in the May 2014 elections it has come up to 11.3% of the total candidates in this country. This includes those women who stood as party candidates, but it also includes those women who had stood as independents. So ultimately, only those who came out successfully in the parliament were only 11.3%, and these 11.3% are from the political parties, and no independent woman has been able to succeed in our election in this country. We know there are other factors which also play a role in our elections. So women, independent women, it's very, very difficult for them to come up as successful candidates. So we have come up to 11.3, which is still a very low figure compared to the 33% we have been fighting for a very long time. If only more women stand as candidates and more women come successfully as parliament members, maybe the movement for 33% can be happy about it, satisfied about it, but it's still not anywhere near that. And even this participation is essentially from the 2 major parties, namely BJP and Congress, which what happens is when there is a big crisis in the party is losing its confidence of fighting the elections, then they give less number of women the seats, because what they want is winnability. They want to put up candidates who will definitely win or who have more chances of winning. And they always think women are not winnable candidates, though the figures have not really stood by them, because if considering the number of women you put up, the number of women who won have not been so bad, but still the parties always believe women are not winnable candidates, except especially where you have a powerful challenge or where you have violence, where the money power's role is much higher, there the women do not get a chance. In fact, you find the few women who have even got a chance to stand in candidates, it's very sad to see, they have been put up only in those constituencies where definitely the party will not win. The opposition candidate is very, very powerful. Then you put up a woman, like in front of Rahul Gandhi, you put up a woman, the BJP put up a woman, knowing very well the chances of Rahul Gandhi winning is much more than the chances of their own woman candidate. So this doesn't reflect very well of the political parties who do not give seats to women, and if they give them the seats and tickets, they put them up in weak constituencies of the party, and so the winnability then they say is not much. But all these are part of, well, one must say, the patriarchal setup which is still prevailing in our political process, in our election process, and in our political party process as such. So we do find our political parties perhaps still have not come up the way we would expect them to come up in the elections as such. There are other aspects of the political parties too. The membership of the political party. How many women are members of the political parties? Well, one important feature here is neither in Nepal, nor in Pakistan, nor in India, perhaps not even in Bangladesh, no political party has proper record of membership. Though they are supposed to submit this to the election commission, national election commissions all over, such a list is never provided properly, and it's inaccurate registration. And what is available, if you see that, the registration of women members is very poor. So we do not get any authoritative data on the number of members or women members in the political parties as such. But the popular impression is, we all know it, that very few women are members of the political parties. Not great effort is not being made to enlist, recruit women as members of the political parties. It doesn't mean the women have no role or they are not playing any role in the political parties. You will find them working. If you go to a party headquarters anywhere, you find them working as volunteers, you will find them working as campaigners, you are finding them working as preparing the background material and things like this. You find them serving in many aspects of necessary activities within the political parties. But they are not being recruited as powerful members, they are not definitely given the chance or the place to come up as leaders in the various political parties. The result is they don't get tickets in this. This is very sad, because once again that is a stereotyping of women's role. Once again we believe women can only perform these roles of being supporters, as background persons and servers of the interest of the males, rather than as equal members even in the political parties. So it's a tremendous challenge. You see a lot of women in the parties, but they are not in the corridors of power of the parties all over South Asia. That's where the historical, cultural conservatism, social orthodoxy and the patriarchy come into play in our South Asia much more strongly perhaps than in some of the Western liberal democracies as such. So unless the party leaders recognize the role of women, give them a visibility, give them important roles, one can't hope they will ever get a ticket in the political party as such. But contrast to all this has been the bright aspect of women's role in the local government. This is a very bright aspect. This is something which pushes South Asia on the top of the world. Because it's only in the South Asian region we have more and more women participating in the local governance. Once again, this is a discussion, this is a debate which has been going on in our countries for a long time, and we all try to adopt this sort of movement where we can bring more and more women at the lower level, particularly in India. By the 73rd and the 72nd and 73rd constitutional amendments in 1992, 93, we could bring 33% of women as chairpersons and as members in the local level and in the urban and the rural level as such, both in the position as members as well as at the position of chairpersons. So this has been a tremendous achievement, thrown a lot of visibility to women in the rural side and given them a lot of roles in the rural side. Along the same time almost, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan also adopted a similar type of reforms in their own political process. Nepal started this village developmental councils, VDCs. Once again, they are also in the rural side of India, rural side of Nepal, 33% reservation was granted to women, which was functioning very well. Until recently. Recently, with all these political developments taking place at the national level, the elections to the local governments were stalled for a while. They postponed, they still remain postponed, and so for so many years now, no elections have taken place. So, in a way, the local governments are stuck, they are not operating anymore in Nepal. Similar things took place in Bangladesh. They had a very successful local government with women participating in it. They also had 30% reservation for women at the village, intermediary levels, and very successfully doing it. A lot of literature came about their functioning, but once again with the national politics moving between one to the other, then you find there also one leader is not interested in these local elections because they are giving women more power, and that was going against that political party. So, it was really in the limbo as such, and so no local government with women's participation existing in Bangladesh either. But Pakistan has been a little more bright example where this reservation for women in the local government is continuing, and in the various areas of Pakistan we do have women participating very successfully. They participate also because of that the national level too very well, and there are a lot of conferences and sammelans, as you call conferences, take place in this. Even in Afghanistan, though they don't have any of these reservation as such in general, but they also had a constituent assembly where they also had reservation for women in that particular local level, but later on it has not been continued as yet. So, we do find these 3 or 4 countries in South Asia moving very actively at the local level, and they gave them a lot of encouragement. Of course, India and Pakistan are continuing with these reservations. In fact, many states in India are, since Panchayati Raj as they are called, or municipalities as they are called, acts, they are under the state subject in India's federal setup. They have increased the 33% into 50%. You have Bihar, you have Karnataka, you have Maharashtra, which are all giving 50%. They also extended the reservation to OBCs. In fact, of late, there is a move recently to increase even on a national scale even this 33% into 50%, because the constitutional amendment itself of 1992-93 talked only about 33%. Now, to make it universal and make all the states in India adopt 50%, we need to further amend the constitutional amendment to 50%, and there is a move to increase this quota to 50%, which will be good and also serve the purposes or concepts of equality as such. This participation of women definitely has had a lot of impact on the community as well as on the family. Whether it's the example of Nepal or example of Bangladesh or India or Pakistan, we get the same sort of impact analysis where they say that it has definitely raised the level of women. It does not matter if they are not educationally advanced or socially advanced, but they are politically advanced, politically in the sense the power within the family or the power outside the family. There is a lot more visibility and power which these women have had because of service. In India, of course, there are a lot of records, a lot of literature which has come up over a period of time showing how the status of women has tremendously improved within the family. The type of roles they were playing, only very, very stereotyped sex-based roles, are changing quite a lot, and many of them are participating in economic activity, political activity, party activities, and many other such activities which give them a little more confidence even to deal with some of these issues within the family, like violence or subordination or suppression, things like this. So, the impact has been tremendous, and this is the impact which we need to have At the local level, because the local levels are the ones where women are much more backward. However, the sorry state of affairs is, even though they made their mark in the local level, they are not able to move up to the state or the central level, because the political parties, as we saw before, still are not ready to pick them up for that role as such. So we have seen in the political parties how the leadership has some place for women, the membership have very little space for women, but when it comes to taking up the women's issues and manifestos, because the most important reason why the reservation is not coming up or membership is not increasing is because women have not become a vote bank in many of these countries. Occasionally they do, but not as a consistent pattern. The result is the women's issues do not get reflected in the party manifestos as such. But of late, because of the increasing role of leaders, women leaders, and the increasing importance and the increasing number of women participating in the voter turnout, there is an attempt by political parties to include more and more of women's issues in the national manifestos, but then the national manifestos themselves are not given that importance anymore as they used to be in earlier years. So the women's issues also correspondingly get diluted, and their impact on the policies thereby gets reduced. Who can help the situation? I think this is the last bit I'll talk about. Somebody has to work on it. The situation has to improve in all the various countries. Mainly the NGOs have taken it up, both the international NGOs, United Nations, and the international NGOs, as well as the local country based NGOs, the SAARC NGOs. There are a lot of movements which are taking place, networking which are taking place both on the world scale as well as on the regional scale. There is a lot of combined activities which the women NGOs from South Asia have organized themselves. Frequent conferences, frequent understandings, frequent exchange of opinions on what's happening in various countries, how exactly to overcome the challenges. These are taking place quite often in the past 10 years, and these are still continuing in these various countries, and women NGOs are showing a lot of interest, and even some of the general NGOs are showing a lot of interest in combining and keeping this movement alive. In fact, the political empowerment as an issue essentially is an issue which the NGOs of all countries have taken up, particularly in South Asian region, and women NGOs have been extremely active on this over the period, though of late sometimes you find in countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, for political reasons, these NGOs are little dormant, but Nepal, Pakistan, India still going very strong with women NGOs who, apart from various other issues concerning general society and women as such, their political empowerment, participation, democracy, bringing the issues of women up, participating in gender budgeting, and thereby pushing women's issues into their national budgets, auditing them. These are very many roles which the women NGOs are undertaking. They are also undertaking a lot of awareness policies among the women so that they go and vote in the elections in big numbers. Because unless they vote in the elections in big numbers, they will not get the recognition from the political parties or leaders who will not give them that importance which they should otherwise give. There are limitations on it, of course, education, this vast size, and the lack of, the most important limitation on us is the economic limitation. Women still do not, in all these various countries, women still do not have any private property. Though the property rights are there, actual ownership of economic resources is very meager, and still the society is so patriarchal, the families will not back the women if they want to stand in the elections, and the elections themselves have become marked by more and more of violence and money power in all the 7 Asian countries, and women cannot afford to get into this. With the result, the parties also backtrack on the women by saying they are not winnable. Because when the political parties say you are not winnable, what they mean is really you can't bring money into elections, you can't put your own money into elections, and the parties cannot afford to take up your campaigning completely. You have to do it something. And since the families don't back up, and there's no property to sell or mortgage and go into the elections, most of the women really are reluctant to get into, and most of the parties are very reluctant to give tickets to women as such. This remains as a very big limitations for us. That's why a lot of suggestions have come up for further action if women have to participate in democracy and in the development of their country in all the six Asian countries as such, South Asian countries as such. One, we want a lot of legislative and electoral changes. There cannot be electoral change only for women unless there are electoral changes, electoral reforms and legislative reforms for the entire country. So reduction of violence, reduction of role of money power, the complete elimination of muscle power, peaceful elections, stable elections are something, regular elections are something which are needed in the countries as such, so that women also can participate in them as equal citizens. Particularly violence and money power are playing very big role. So very many NGOs, women NGOs particularly, are asking for state funding of elections the same way as it happens in England. The state funding of elections for all candidates is there in England. So we also would like to have a state funding of elections, at least up to a particular point, for all candidates in the elections as such. So not merely women, but other weaker sections like SCs and STs and others, or OBCs and many others, can also participate in the elections as candidates, not depending on any other source as much as donations. If the state funding is there, then the people also will come up with donations for. We have one party in this country which believes or which says that they have based all their election expenditure on elections recently, the Aam Aadmi Party, but even they did not put up enough women candidates, because if it's based only on donations, then women also can receive donations. It's very sad, but we do require a lot of changes in our electoral reforms, electoral politics, so that more women can participate. It's not merely women participating. These ones will also strengthen the democracy itself and make them fair and free and equitable for all population in this country. Women only showcase the issues of democracy here. Women only are highlighting the problems involved in holding elections in our countries. So the women, the NGOs and women's movement cannot cease to exist. They have to further and further go on with this campaigning which they have been doing, awareness raising which they have been doing, pressurizing the political parties which they keep doing before every elections, asking for women's issues in the manifestos, and asking for. The National Commission for Women once upon a time took up these issues very strongly. They even prepared a list of women candidates, supplied them to the various political parties, saying give them the candidate seats. But of course the political parties obviously ignored this list and went ahead and did their own type of choice of candidates. So the state commissions for women, the National Commission for Women, the NGOs, the women's movements within the university system, outside the university system, and various places should discuss this more and more and see how democracy and the political processes have involved women or not. Because if they don't involve women in this political empowerment process, then they cannot have think of any democracy or equal rights or human rights or gender equality for women in the broader society as such. Because they are also part of women's rights. And the United Nations recently has introduced a new type of measurement called the Gender Equality Index. It was not Gender Disparity Index, both ways, which show very clearly
Very sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, because
the inequality prevailing, which is a democratic process. So let's have more women in politics to have more equality in the society. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for delivering us such a nice lecture. Because we are short of time over here, I would like to tell you all that if you have any queries, you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.